First of all, what is Biblical Hebrew? Biblical Hebrew is the primary language that the first 39 books of the Bible were written in. These books are sometimes collectively referred to as the Old Testament. In Hebrew, they are called the Tanakh. In this course, you will be learning aspects of the Hebrew language that are necessary to read the Tanakh. My goal is to take you from knowing nothing at all about Hebrew to being able to read a Hebrew Bible verse as quickly as possible. This course does not teach modern vocabulary or grammar. So, for example, we're not going to learn how to ask where the bathroom is or how much a taxi costs. This course is specifically tailored for people whose end goal is to read the Bible in its original language. There are several resources that are available in this course. The first resource is this series of video lectures. Each of these lectures is roughly 20 to 30 minutes long and covers one or two basic principles of Hebrew, with explanations and examples. I tried to be clear and thorough in my explanations, but of course you can feel free to pause or rewind the video if the material is moving too quickly. The second resource is a written summary and exercise sheet that accompanies each lesson. The summary is just a paragraph or two that briefly sums up what each lesson is about, and the exercise sheet is a set of homework problems that you can solve in order to practice your new Hebrew skills. The answers to the exercises are included so you can check your own work. You can find the link to the summary and exercises for each lesson in the description below each video. I encourage you to do the exercises because they will help you understand and remember the information much better than just watching the videos. So, now that you know what you're getting into, let's look at some of the basic features of the Hebrew language. Biblical Hebrew is written and read from right to left. Of course, English words and sentences are written from left to right, so you will have to get used to reading and writing backwards. Don't worry though, it's not quite as difficult as you might think, though it does take a little getting used to. Hebrew has its own alphabet. In English, of course, we use the letters A through Z, and these letters comprise what is called the Latin alphabet. There are many languages that use this Latin alphabet, including Spanish, German, and French. So if you've learned any of those languages, then you've had the luxury of being able to use all of the letters that you're already used to. The Hebrew language, however, is much older than the Latin language, and Hebrew has a different alphabet with different letters. We'll be spending the first few lectures in this course learning all about the Hebrew letters and the sounds that they make. Speaking of letters, Hebrew letters do not have an uppercase and lowercase form. So, Hebrew names are not capitalized, and the first word of a sentence is not capitalized because there aren't any capital letters. That's good for us because you only have to learn one form of each letter instead of having to learn an uppercase and lowercase form. Also, the Hebrew of the Bible does not have punctuation markings. There are no periods, no commas, and no quotation marks. Hebrew letters can be written with different scripts. A script is the way that the letters appear. In English, we can write in print, or we can write in cursive, and you can think of those two forms as different scripts. The letters being written are the same letters, they make the same sounds, but they look different. Hebrew also has a number of different scripts. The oldest Hebrew writings that have been found were written in a script called Paleo-Hebrew. Here you can see what that Paleo-Hebrew looks like. I won't be going into detail on Paleo-Hebrew in this course, but one very interesting thing to note about it is that the Greek alphabet is actually derived from the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet, and the Latin alphabet is derived from the Greek alphabet. So many of the letters that we use today in English could be considered the grandchildren of ancient Hebrew letters. Again, we're not going to be talking in detail about those things in this course, but I do think that it is worth mentioning that when you learn Hebrew, you're not just learning a foreign language, but you're learning a language that is one of the ancient ancestors of the English language. Returning to our discussion of scripts, the script that we are going to be learning to read and write is called the Babylonian script, also known as the Aramaic script or the square script. Here you can see what that script looks like. This script was developed by Hebrew scribes after the Babylonian captivity, which started around 600 BC. The reason that we're going to be learning this particular script is that most copies of the Tanakh that are available today are written in this script. So if you want to be able to read a Hebrew Bible, this is the most useful script to know. Another feature of Hebrew is that Hebrew has small symbols that are called vowel points. In English, we have 5 letters that are vowels: A, E, I, O, and U, and the rest of the letters are called consonants. Most Hebrew letters make the sounds of consonants, and the vowel sounds are indicated by vowel points. To see what this looks like, here is a Hebrew word. Right now, this Hebrew word has only letters and no vowel points. Here, we've added some vowel points beneath the letters. Whenever you read Hebrew, the little dots and lines that are underneath the letters are called vowel points. Hebrew always had vowel sounds, but these vowel points did not always exist. Written vowel points were invented about 1200 years ago by a group of scribes called the Masoretes. Before these vowel points, when you read Hebrew, you just had to be familiar enough with the language to know which vowel sounds to use and where to use them. But thanks to the Masoretes and their vowel points, it's much easier to learn Hebrew today. In this course, we are going to learn these vowel points, not only because it makes the language easier to learn, but also because any Tanakh you find today is going to have vowel points in it. So, we've explained how we're going to write the letters and vowels, but how are we going to pronounce them? As you might have guessed, there are a number of different ways to actually pronounce the Hebrew letters and vowels. These different ways of pronouncing Hebrew are called dialects. Every language has different dialects. For example, I speak English, but the way I pronounce English words is different from the way someone in Scotland would pronounce those same words. In fact, they wouldn't call their country Scotland, they would say something more like Scotland. In the same way, people pronounce English differently in Alabama than they do in Minnesota. So English has a number of different dialects, and Hebrew has different dialects also. In this course, the dialect we're going to be learning is called Modern Hebrew, or Israeli Hebrew. This dialect is considered proper speech in modern Israel, and it is actually a blend of 2 older dialects. One other dialect worth mentioning is called the Ashkenazic dialect. This dialect comes from Jews who lived in Germany, and it is still a very popular dialect today, especially among Orthodox Jews. It is very likely that you will hear Hebrew spoken in the Ashkenazic dialect at some point. So in this course, we are going to officially teach the modern dialect, but I will also tell you some things about the Ashkenazic dialect so that you can recognize it when you hear it. There is one more thing I need to explain about Hebrew dialects, and that is, why am I teaching a modern dialect in a biblical Hebrew course? Why don't I teach a dialect that was spoken at the time the Hebrew Bible was written? There are 2 reasons for this. First, we don't know exactly how Hebrew was pronounced in ancient times. Scholars have come up with some educated guesses, but since we don't have any 3,000-year-old audio recordings, we just can't know for certain how the Hebrew of ancient times really sounded. Second, Hebrew had different dialects even in biblical times, and the Bible itself tells us this. In the book of Judges, chapter 12, we find a story of a civil war that took place during the reign of the judge Jephthah. During this conflict, Jephthah's armies could tell the difference between Ephraimites and other Israelites by the way the Ephraimites pronounced the word shibboleth. In other words, the Ephraimites' dialect was different from the dialect of the other Israelites. So this means there were dialectic differences in the Hebrew language long before even King David's time. So even if I knew exactly how to pronounce every Hebrew dialect that existed from the time of Moses to the time of Ezra, it's not clear which one of those dialects you could consider the most biblical. So instead of taking a wild guess at how the language was spoken at some particular past time and place, I'm just going to teach the pronunciation of Hebrew that you will most likely hear today. And again, just to clarify, even though we're learning a modern pronunciation of Hebrew, we are not learning modern Hebrew vocabulary. We won't be learning words for things like airplane or television because we don't need to know those words in order to read the Tanakh. Finally, this is an introductory level course. My goal is to take you from a place of knowing nothing at all about Hebrew to actually reading a Bible verse in as short a time as possible. Consequently, I am not going to cover every single detail of the language, nor am I going to mention every exception to every rule. My goal in this course is to give you enough information to get started learning Hebrew without getting bogged down in all the technical details right away. As we get further into the course, I will supply more and more details so you can get a more complete and correct understanding of the language. But at first, I'm going to simplify everything as much as I can, again, so that you can get to reading and writing the language on a basic level as quickly as possible. This course is designed to give you a good base of knowledge and understanding that you can build on later if you decide that you really want to dig into the language. If you do decide to continue learning the language when you have completed this course, my recommendation would be to either take a university Hebrew course or to find a Hebrew language tutor. So, let's quickly review everything I've talked about today. Hebrew is written and read from right to left. We are going to learn the Hebrew alphabet. We are going to learn biblical Hebrew vocabulary and grammar. We are going to write using the Babylonian script and the Masoretic vowel points. Finally, we are going to pronounce the words in the modern Israeli dialect, while also making a note of the Ashkenazic dialect. We're going to end every lesson with this Hebrew word, aleph. This is what an aleph looks like. The aleph is a silent letter. It makes no sound of its own. I'll explain why there is a silent letter in just a moment, but first let's see our next letter. The second letter is beit. Some letters in Hebrew can make two different sounds, and the beit is one of those letters. The good news is, there is a way to tell which sound the beit is making. The beit on the left side makes the sound of the letter V, as in the word vine. However, if the beit has a dot in the center of it, like the beit on the right, it will instead make the sound of the letter B, as in boy. That dot is called a dagesh. So, beit without a dagesh is V, beit with a dagesh is B. Here we have a vowel point. This vowel is called a kamatz. The names of the vowels are not nearly as important as the sounds they make, but I will be referring to the vowels by name, so it will be helpful to remember their names if you can. Kamatz looks kind of like a stubby letter T. Kamatz makes the sound of short A, as in the words far or call. The kamatz is written directly under a letter. So here you can see an aleph with a kamatz written underneath of it. If you were to pronounce this, you would pronounce the aleph first and then the kamatz. So in this case, the aleph is silent and the kamatz makes the sound ah. So together, this letter and vowel would be pronounced ah. If we were to use a beit instead, so this is a beit with a dagesh and a kamatz underneath the beit, we would first pronounce the b of the beit and then the ah of the kamatz underneath the beit. So this combination would be pronounced ba. When you read Hebrew words, you will always pronounce the letter first, then the vowel that is attached to the letter. Speaking of Hebrew words, now that we know two letters and a vowel, we can make our first word. This word starts on the right with an aleph. Under the aleph is a kamatz vowel, and at the end is the letter beit. So let's pronounce this word, starting on the right and moving to the left. On the right is the letter aleph, so we pronounce that first. Aleph is silent, so that's easy to pronounce. Underneath the aleph is a kamatz, so we pronounce that next. Kamatz makes the sound ah. Finally, we pronounce the beit. Beit can make two different sounds, but this beit has no dagesh, so it is pronounced like a V. So, aleph is silent, kamatz is ah, and beit is v. Altogether, this word is pronounced av. Av means father. This word illustrates why Hebrew has a silent letter. Before the vowel points were written, if we wanted to start a word with a vowel sound, we would need to have a letter that shows there is a vowel sound there. Since it is silent, that's what the aleph allows us to do. The third letter is gimel. Gimel makes the sound of hard G, g, as in girl. The fourth letter is dalet. Dalet makes the sound of D, d, as in door. With the gimel and dalet, we can make another word. This word is spelled, starting on the right, dalet, kamatz under the dalet, and then gimel at the end. Before we pronounce this word, you'll notice there is a dagesh, a dot, inside of the dalet. In some letters, the dagesh changes the pronunciation of the letter, but most letters do not change pronunciation. The dalet can only make one sound, so this dagesh does not affect its pronunciation. If you're wondering why there is a dagesh here if it doesn't change the letter's pronunciation, that's because the dagesh serves a very technical purpose, and we're not going to get into that at this point. What you need to know for now is that you will find the dagesh in many words, but you only need to worry about it when it is in very particular letters whose sound can change. So with that out of the way, let's pronounce this word. The dalet makes the sound d, then the kametz underneath it makes the sound a, and finally, the gimel at the end makes the sound g. Altogether, this is pronounced dag. Dag means a fish. The fifth letter is he. He makes the sound of the letter H, h, as in house. At the end of a word, the he is silent. This is another vowel. This vowel is called the patach. Like the kamatz, it is written under the letter, and also like the kamatz, it makes the sound a. So patach and kamatz make the exact same sound. You may ask, why are there two vowels that make the same sound? The answer is that they probably did not originally make the same sound. In fact, in the Ashkenazic dialect, patach makes the sound a, just like it does here, but the kamatz makes the sound aw, as in the word lawn. These two sounds, a and aw, sound very similar, so it's possible that these two vowels started out different, and then some dialects simply lost the distinction between these two sounds over time. And so today, we have two vowels that make the same sound. But whatever the explanation is, in the dialect we are learning, both of these vowels do make the exact same sound. Let's review what we learned this lesson. We learned 5 letters: aleph, beit, gimel, dalet, and he. We learned 2 vowel points, kamatz and patach. And we learned 2 words. Find a written summary of this lesson at the link in the description below this video. Let's review what we learned last lesson. We learned 5 letters: aleph, which is silent; beit, which makes the sound of the letter V as in violet, or if it has a dot in the middle of it, the sound of the letter B as in boy; gimel makes the sound of hard G, g as in girl; dalet makes the sound of the letter D as in door; he makes the sound of the letter H, and it is silent at the end of a word. We also learned 2 vowel points, which both make the same sound. The patach is a straight horizontal line, and it makes the sound a. And the kametz looks kind of like a T, and it also makes the sound a. Both of these vowels are written underneath of a letter, and they both make the same sound. We also learned 2 words. We read and pronounce these words from right to left. The first word is spelled aleph with a kamatz vowel, and then beit with no dagesh. It is pronounced av, and it means father. The second word is spelled dalet with a kamatz vowel, and then gimel. It is pronounced dog, and it means a fish. Now we will start learning some more letters, starting with the sixth letter, the vav. Vav makes the sound of the letter V, as in violet. This is the same sound that is made by a beit with no dagesh. Some linguists believe that the vav used to make a sound more like a W, but in the dialect we are learning, it makes the sound V. The seventh letter is the zayin. Zayin makes the sound of the letter Z, as in zebra. The eighth letter is the chet. Chet makes the sound ch. This can be a tricky sound to make, ch. It comes from the back of your throat, and it's similar to the sound people make when they are preparing to spit. It's not that sound, but it gives you an idea of how to make it. It does take some practice to get comfortable with it. Since this is a sound that we do not have in English words, English does not have a letter or combination of letters that actually make this sound. So when Hebrew is transliterated into English, the English letters CH are typically used to represent the sound of the chet. Of course, normally in English, CH makes the sound ch. But since Hebrew does not have the sound ch, you can assume anytime you see an English transliteration of a Hebrew word, and that word has the letters CH in it, the sound those letters make is ch. One other thing to note about the chet is that it looks very similar to the he. In fact, the only difference between the chet and the he is that the he has this little gap in the upper left corner. So the chet is always in one piece, the he is separated into two pieces by that little gap. So pay close attention when you're reading and writing a he or a chet. With that chet, we can make our next word. This word is spelled aleph, kamatz under the aleph, and then chet at the end. So let's pronounce this word. The aleph is silent, and then the kamatz makes the sound ah. And finally, the chet makes the sound ch. Altogether, this is pronounced ach. Ach means brother. Here's our next letter, the ninth letter. This letter is called tet. Tet makes the sound of the letter T, as in table. Here we have our next vowel. This vowel is called cholam. It is a single dot, and it makes the sound O. There are two forms of the cholam, which we will learn about in just a bit. The cholam is not written underneath a letter, so while most vowels are written underneath the letters, the cholam is written above and to the left of a letter. Here is what that looks like. On the right, we have a beit with a dagesh, and if we want the cholam sound to come after that beit, then we will write the cholam a little bit off the upper left corner of the beit, and that will give us the total sound bo. On the left, we have the same thing, but with a dalet. First, we pronounce the d of the dalet, and then the o of the cholam, so that will make do. Again, most vowels are written underneath the letters, but the cholam is written like this instead. Also, as I mentioned, the cholam has two forms. The one form it can take is just a single dot, like we just saw. And the second form it can take is this form, a dot written above a letter vav. If you see a vav with a cholam over the top of it, then the vav will not make its V sound. The vav just becomes part of the vowel. So the only sound that is made here is the O sound of the cholam. So a cholam can be just a dot by itself, or a dot over a vav. Either way, it makes the sound O. Here you can see both forms of the cholam in use. On the right, there is a beit followed by a cholam, and this would be pronounced bo. On the left, you can see a beit followed by a full cholam, so a vav with a cholam dot over the top, and this would also be pronounced bo. That vav, when it's combined with a cholam, does not make the V sound. It's just considered part of the cholam vowel. With the cholam, we can make our next real word. This word is spelled tate, then vav with cholam, and finally a beit. Let's pronounce this word. Tate makes the sound t. The vav with the cholam makes the sound o. And the beit with no dagesh makes the sound v. Altogether, this is pronounced tov. Tov means good. Our last letter for this lesson is the yod. Yod makes the sound of the letter Y, as in yes. Yod is the smallest letter in the alphabet, which you'll see in our next word. This is what the yod looks like next to a normal-sized letter. It's about half the height. If you were to write these letters on notebook paper, a normal letter like the dalet might be 2 lines tall, and the yod would only be 1 line tall. Also notice that the yod lines up with the top of the dalet, not the bottom. If the other letters were considered to be standing on the bottom of the line they are written on, then the yod looks like it's floating next to the other letters. Let's go ahead and read this word. We have a yod, a kamatz under the yod, and then a dalet at the end. To pronounce this, the yod makes the sound y, the kametz makes a, and finally the dalet makes the sound d. Altogether, this is pronounced yad. Yad means hand. Actually, yad is not just the hand, but is what we would consider the hand and the forearm together. That whole structure is called yad. Let's review what we learned this lesson. We learned 5 new letters: vav, which makes the sound v, zayin, which makes the sound z, chet, which makes the sound ch, tate, which makes the sound t, and yod, which makes the sound y. We learned 1 new vowel, the cholam. Cholam makes the sound o. It has 2 forms. One is just a dot, and the other is a dot over top of a vav. We also learned 3 new words. Ach means brother, tov means good, and yad. Learn Biblical Hebrew with 119 Ministries. This is Lesson 4. A written summary of this lesson can be found at the link in the description below. Let's review what we've learned so far. Say the letters with me, starting on the right. Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tate, Yod. We have learned 3 vowels. The kamatz and patach are both written under a letter, and they both make the sound a. The cholam has 2 forms, with a vav and without a vav, and both forms make the sound o. Last lesson, we learned 3 new words. From right to left, ach means brother, tov means good, and yad means hand. In this lesson, we'll be picking up with our 11th letter, kaf. The kaf can make 2 different sounds, and it also is written in 2 different forms. Let's talk about the sound it makes first. Like the beit, the kaf can make 2 different sounds. On the right, there is a kaf with a dagesh, that's the dot in the middle. With a dagesh in it, the kaf makes the sound of the letter K. On the left is a kaf without a dagesh in it. When it does not have a dagesh, kaf makes the sound ch, just like the letter chet. The kaf can also be written 2 different ways. Normally, it looks like the kaf on the right. But if the kaf is at the end of a word, then it is written like the kaf on the left. This is called a final kaf. It is still the same letter, and it makes the same sound. It just looks different. Again, the final kaf is only used when the kaf is the last letter in a word. We'll see some examples of this later on. Here you can see that the final kaf extends below the normal line of writing. A regular cough is the same height as most other letters, but the final cough is extra long at the bottom. Just like in English, a lowercase y or j dips down lower than the other letters. Another thing to note is that the cough and the bait look very similar. The difference is in the lower right corner. The bait has this little tail that extends out to the right, while the cough has a rounded edge there. Also, the final cough looks very similar to a dalet. The big difference here is that the final cough is longer at the bottom than the dalet. So just pay close attention to your coughs. Make sure you aren't mistaking them for other letters. The 12th letter is the lamed. It is much simpler than the cough. It just makes the sound of the letter L, as in lion. The one special thing about the lamed is that it is the tallest of all the letters. It actually extends up above the normal line of writing. Here you can see it compared to a regular cough. With the lamed, we can make our next word. This word starts with a lamed, then it has a cholam vowel, that's the dot to the left of the lamed. Finally, there is an aleph at the end. Let's pronounce this word. The lamed makes la, the cholam makes o, and the aleph is silent. Altogether, this is pronounced lo. Lo means no. So if you happen to be in Israel and someone asks you if pineapple belongs on pizza, you can say lo. The 13th letter is mem. Mem makes the sound of the letter M. Mem also has a final form, which looks like this. On the right is a regular mem, and on the left is final mem. You can see here that the final mem is completely enclosed, and the regular mem has this opening in the bottom. Again, most of the time, we will use the mem on the right, and we will only use the final mem if that mem is at the end of a word. One more vowel, and then we'll start using these final letters. This vowel is the segol. It makes the sound eh, as in the word get. It is written underneath of a letter. And here is our next word. This is a lamed with a segol, then a chet with a segol, and at the end is a final mem. Why is it a final mem? Because it's the last letter in the word. So let's pronounce this word. The lamed makes la, the segol is eh, the chet is ch, the segol is eh, and finally, mem makes the sound ma. Altogether, this is pronounced le-chem. Lechem. Lechem means bread. Here is another word. This one starts with a mem, so this mem is written in its normal form. Underneath the mem is a segol. Next is a lamed, with a segol under it also. And finally, there is a final cough at the end. Again, this cough has to be in its final form because it is at the end of this word. So let's pronounce this word. Mem is ma, segol is eh, lamed is la, segol is eh, and this cough has no dagesh, so it is pronounced ch. Altogether, this is pronounced me-le-ch, melech. Melech means king. The last letter for this lesson, and the 14th letter in the alphabet, is the nun. Nun makes the sound of the letter N. Nun also has a final form. This is what the final nun looks like. Again, final letters are only used at the end of words. Here we can see that the final nun extends below the normal line of writing, just like the final kaf does. The regular nun looks very similar to a gimel. The difference is here, in the bottom right, where the nun is flat, but the gimel has this little tail. Also, the final nun looks a lot like a vav. Of course, you can tell these apart by the length of the final nun. The vav is regular height, and the final nun extends down below the normal line of writing. Here we have one more vowel. This is the tsera. It is two dots written side by side. They are written underneath of a letter, and it makes the sound of long A, as in the word say. Here is one more word. It starts with a kaf, underneath that is a tsera, and at the end is a final nun. Let's pronounce this word. The kaf has a dagesh, so it is pronounced ka. The tsera is pronounced a, and the nun is pronounced n. Altogether, this is pronounced kain. Kain means yes. So we've learned lo, which means no, and now kain, which means yes. Let's review what we learned this lesson. We've learned 4 new letters: the kaf, lamed, mem, and nun. 3 of those letters have final forms. Those are the final kaf, final mem, and final nun. They are written in their final form at the end of words. We learned 2 new vowels. The segol is 3 dots and makes the sound eh. The tsera is 2 dots and makes the sound a. We learned 4 new words. Lo means no, lechem means bread, melech means king, and kain means yes. Starting with the letters. The letters we've learned are aleph, beit, gimel, dalet, hey, vav, zayin, chet, tet, yod, kaf, lamed, mem, and nun. Here are all the vowels we've learned, starting from the right. The kamats and patach make the sound ah. The cholam has 2 forms, and both make the sound o. The tsera makes the sound a, and the segol makes the sound eh. We also learned 4 new words in the last lesson. Lo means no, lechem means bread, melech means king, and kain means yes. Here is the 15th letter, the samech. Samech makes the sound of S, as in the word sand. The samech looks very much like a final mem. In fact, I would say that these 2 letters are confused for each other the second most out of all the letters. The difference is the bottom edge. Samech is much more rounded on the bottom, while the final mem has a totally flat bottom edge. So, pay close attention to your samechs and final mems. The 16th letter is ayin. Today, ayin is considered silent like the aleph, but it used to make a sound similar to the ng sound, ng, at the end of words like ring and sing. For purposes of our lessons, we are going to treat it like a silent letter. Our next vowel is the chirik. Chirik is written as a single dot underneath the letter. Chirik makes the sound of short I, as in the words big or kid. Of course, the cholam is also a single dot, but the cholam is written in a different position than the chirik. The chirik is written underneath the letter, just like most other vowels, but the cholam is written above and to the left of the letter. Here we have a word that uses the chirik. This is spelled mem, with a patach underneath it, then yod, with a chirik underneath it, then a final mem at the end. Let's pronounce this word. The mem is pronounced ma, the patach is a, the yod is y, the chirik is I, and the final mem is ma. Altogether, this is pronounced ma-yim. mayim. Mayim means water. Here is another word. This is spelled ayin with a patach, then yod with a chirik, and at the end is a final nun. Let's pronounce this word. Ayin is silent, and the patach makes ah. Then the yod is y, the chirik is I, and the nun at the end makes the sound n. Altogether, this is pronounced ayin. Ayin. Ayin means eye, as in the body part that sees. Ayin is also the name of the letter ayin, and that's because in the Paleo-Hebrew script, the letter ayin was a round letter, the shape of an eye. The 17th letter is pe. Pe can make two sounds. It can make the sound of the letter P or the sound of the letter F. Pe also has a final form. On the right, we have a pe with a dagesh. When pe has a dagesh, it makes the sound of P, as in Peter. On the left is a pe without a dagesh. And without the dagesh, pe makes the sound of F, as in the word fall. Here is the final pe. Again, a letter is only written in its final form when it is the last letter in a word. Just like the kaf and the nun, the final pe extends below the normal line of writing. Here's a word using the pe. It starts with a pe, underneath that is a segel, and at the end there is a he. Let's pronounce this word. The pe has a dagesh, so it is pronounced p. The segel is pronounced e, and the he at the end of a word is silent. Altogether, this makes pe. Pe means mouth. This is also the name of the letter pe. The 18th letter is tsadi. Tsadi makes the sound s. It's a T sound immediately followed by an S sound, ts. It's the sound you can find at the end of a word like cats. It's also the sound that the two Z's make in the word pizza. The tsadi has a final form. This is the last letter that has a final form. So there are 5 total: the kaf, mem, nun, pe, and tsadi. Again, these final forms are only used at the end of a word. The final tsadi, like many of the other final letters, is written long at the bottom. The 19th letter is kuf. Kuf makes the same sound as the kaf, that is, the kaf with a dagesh. K, as in the word kick. You'll see this sound depicted as both a K and a Q. I prefer to use a Q because the English letter Q actually came from the kuf. Interestingly enough, most of our English letters find their ancestry in these Hebrew letters. But again, that's a topic for another time. One other thing to notice about the kuf is that the long vertical leg on the left extends below the normal line of writing. Here you can see that the kuf is extra long. It's the only non-final letter that extends below the normal line of writing, so you can't really mistake it for any other letters. Let's review what we learned this lesson. We learned 5 new letters: samech, ayin, pe, tsadi, and kuf. 2 of these letters, the pe and the tsadi, have final forms that are written at the end of words. We learned 1 new vowel, the chirik, which is a single dot written underneath a letter. Chirik makes the sound I. And we learned 3 new words: mayim, which means water; ayin, which means eye; aleph, beit, gimel, dalet, he, vav, zayin, chet, tet, yod, kaf, lamed, mem, nun, samech, ayin, pe, tzadi, and kuf. Here are all the vowels we've learned, starting from the right. The kamatz and patach make the sound a. The cholam has two forms, and both make the sound o. The tzera makes the sound a. The segol makes the sound eh. And the chirik makes the sound I. Last time, we also learned 3 new words. Mayim means water. Ayin means eye, that is, the body part that sees. And pe means mouth. Our 20th letter is resh. Resh makes the sound of the letter R. The resh looks very much like a dalet. In fact, these 2 letters are mistaken for each other more than any other letters. So pay close attention whenever you encounter a resh or a dalet. The only difference between resh and dalet is that the resh is more rounded in the upper right corner, whereas the dalet has a little tail there. Here is our next word. We have an aleph with a segol beneath it, then a resh with a segol, and at the end, a final tzadi. Let's pronounce this word. The aleph with the segol is pronounced eh. The resh is r. The segol is eh. And the final tzadi is ts. Altogether, this is pronounced eretz. Eretz. Eretz means land. The 21st letter is sheen. Sheen can make 2 different sounds. It can make the sound of the letter S, s, or it can make the sound of sh, sh. There is a way to tell which sound the sheen is making, but it is not a dagesh. Instead, there is a dot that is placed over the top of the sheen. This dot is not a cholam. Instead, this dot indicates how the sheen should be pronounced. If the dot is over the right side of the sheen, then the letter makes the sound sh, as in the word fish. But if the dot is over the left side of the sheen, then the letter makes the sound s. This is the same sound as the letter samech. Sometimes you will see a sheen with a dot over the left called a sin. Here is a word with a sheen. We have a sheen with the dot over the right side. Under that is a kamatz, then a mem with a patach underneath, then a yod with a chirik underneath, and finally, a final mem. Let's pronounce this word. The sheen with the dot on the right is pronounced sh. The kamatz is pronounced a. Mem is m. Patach is a. Yod is y. Chirik is I. And final mem is m. Altogether, this is pronounced sha ma yim. Shamayim. Shamayim means sky. Here is another word. This is resh, and after the resh there is a cholam. Next is an aleph, and finally a sheen on the end. Let's pronounce this word. Resh is pronounced r. Cholam is o. Aleph is silent, and the sheen, again, has the dot over the right side, so it is pronounced sh. Altogether, this is pronounced rosh. Rosh means head. The 22nd and last letter of the alphabet is tav. Tav makes the sound of the letter t, just like the letter tate. If you remember from lesson 1, I mentioned that Hebrew has different dialects. We are learning the modern dialect, and in that dialect, tav always makes a t sound. However, in the Ashkenazic dialect, tav can make a t sound or an s sound. One prominent example of this is the word Shabbat. Shabbat is the Hebrew word for Sabbath, and it ends in a tav. So in this course, we would pronounce the word Shabbat, but in the Ashkenazic dialect, they pronounce it Shabbos. You may have heard this version of the word Shabbos spoken before. Also, there's at least one other dialect that pronounces the tav as a th or th sound. However, again, in this course, we will always pronounce the tav as t. Here is another word. It starts with an aleph. Under that is a kamatz. Next is a chet. Next is a vav with a cholam. Finally, there is a tav. Let's pronounce this word. The aleph is silent and the kamatz is pronounced a. The chet is ch. The cholam is o. And remember, the vav here is just part of the vowel. And finally, the tav is t. Altogether, this is pronounced achot. Achot. Achot means sister. Let's review what we learned in this lesson. We learned the last three letters, resh, shin, and tav. And we learned 4 new words. Eretz, which means land, shamayim, which means sky, rosh, which means head, and achot, which means sister. Ayin, pe, tzadi, kuf, resh, shin, and tav. Now, let's review all the vowels that we've learned. Kamatz and patach make the sound a. Cholam has 2 forms, both make the sound o. Tsera makes the sound a. Segol makes the sound e. And chirik makes the sound I. Here is a new vowel. This vowel is called shva. It is written as 2 dots, one on top of the other. The shva is written underneath of a letter. The shva makes no sound. Here is a word that uses the shva. It starts with mem, a chirik under the mem, tzadi, shva under the tzadi, vav with a kametz, and a hey at the end. Let's pronounce this word. The mem is pronounced ma, chirik is I, tzadi is tsa, so our first syllable is mitz. Then we have a shva, which makes no sound. Finally, the vav with a kametz would be pronounced va, and the hey on the end is silent. So our first syllable would be mitz, and the second syllable, va. Altogether, this is pronounced mitzvah, mitzvah. Mitzvah means commandment. Here is our next vowel. This is the kubutz. The kubutz is written as 3 dots in a sort of downward slope. The kubutz is written underneath the letter. Kubutz makes the sound as in put or foot. Kubutz is by far the least common vowel in Hebrew, so you will not encounter this vowel very often. Here is one of the more common words that uses the kubutz. This is a shin with a kubutz underneath. After that is a lamed with a shva underneath. Then a chet with a kamatz underneath. And at the end is a final nun. Let's pronounce this word. The shin has the dot over the right side, so it is pronounced like sh, sh. The kubutz makes the short u sound, lamed makes la, and shva is silent. So our first syllable is shul. After the lamed and shva comes a chet, which makes the sound ch. Under that is a kametz, which makes the sound a. And the nun at the end makes the sound n. So our second syllable is chan. Altogether, this is pronounced shulchan. Shulchan. Shulchan means table. And just to be clear, this is a table that has 4 legs and you set things on, not a table like a table of contents. Next, we're going to learn a set of 3 vowels called the chataf vowels. This is the first one. It is called chataf segol. Chataf segol is written underneath a letter, and you can see that it looks like a regular segol, but with a shva right next to it. The reason it looks like that is because that's exactly what it is. It makes the exact same sound as a regular segol, which is the sound as in the word wet. Again, I'm not going to explain why this vowel exists right now. Just remember that segol and chataf segol make the exact same sound. The next chataf vowel is chataf kamatz, which, again, looks like a kamatz with a shva next to it, and makes the exact same sound as the kamatz, which is ah. And the last chataf vowel is chataf patach, which looks like a patach with a shva next to it, and as you may have guessed, makes the exact same sound as a regular patach. In just a moment, we're going to use a chataf vowel, but first, we need to learn one more thing. Here, we have an example of a diphthong. What is a diphthong? A diphthong is a sound that is a combination of 2 other sounds. In this case, we have a chirik vowel, and then after that chirik vowel, we have a yod. Normally, a chirik makes the sound I, and the yod makes the sound y. But when these 2 sounds are combined together, they make the sound E. E as in feet. What is happening here is that the I of the chirik is combining with the y of the yod, and when you sort of smash these 2 sounds together, it comes out as E. There are a number of Hebrew diphthongs, but this one, chirik followed by yod, is the most important one to know. It is also important to remember that this combining of sounds only happens when the yod comes after the chirik. If the yod comes first, then the yod and the chirik both sound normal. But when the yod comes after the chirik, then the 2 sounds will combine to make this long E sound. Here is our next word. We have an aleph, and underneath the aleph is a chataf segol. Next, we have a lamed, and next to the lamed, at the top, we can see a cholam vowel. After that is a hey. Under the hey is a chirik vowel. After that is a yod. And at the end, there is a final mem. This is our longest word yet, so to pronounce it, let's break it down 1 syllable at a time. First, we have an aleph, which is silent, and then a chataf segol, which makes So our first syllable is Next, we have a lamed, which makes la, and a cholam, which makes the sound o. So our second syllable is lo. Next, we have the hey, which makes the sound h, and under the hey is a chirik. Normally, chirik makes the sound I, as in big, but right after the chirik, we have a yod. The chirik followed by the yod makes our diphthong sound E. So the hey plus the E makes he, and then our final mem at the end makes ma. Putting this all together, we get Elohim. Elohim. Elohim means God. It's important to note that Elohim is not a name, so it doesn't have to refer to a specific God. In the scriptures, the word Elohim usually refers to the God of Israel, but it is also sometimes used to refer to pagan gods. So Elohim means God in a sort of generic sense. It doesn't have to refer to the creator of the universe. Here we have our last vowel sound. This is a shuruk. It is a vav with a dot in the middle. This dot is not a dagesh. When you see a dot in the middle of a vav, it means that this is a shuruk vowel. Just like the cholam, when there is a shuruk vowel, the vav will lose its v sound, and the only sound that is left is the sound of the vowel. The sound that shuruk makes is oo, as in the word moon. Finally, we have a very specific circumstance where you break the normal rules of pronunciation. So normally, when there is a letter and a vowel underneath that letter, you will pronounce the sound of the letter first, and then the sound of the vowel. However, in one very specific circumstance, you will pronounce the vowel first. This is that specific circumstance. So, if there is a letter chet, and it is the last letter in a word, only when it is the last letter, and there is a patach underneath the chet, and it has to be a patach, no other vowel. If all three of those conditions are met, then you will pronounce the patach before the chet. So instead of pronouncing this cha, you will pronounce it as ach. This is the one and only time where you will do this. Here is a word that you can use to remember this rule. This word starts with resh. After that is a vav with a shuruk vowel. And then we have a chet with a patach underneath of it at the end. So let's pronounce this word. Resh makes r. Vav with the shuruk vowel is u. And then we have our special case here, a chet at the very end of a word with a patach underneath of it. So normally, one would think that we would pronounce this rucha, but because of the special rule we just mentioned, we pronounce the patach first. So instead, this becomes ruach. Ruach means wind, like a gust of wind or a breeze. It can also be translated spirit. By spirit, I don't mean an alcoholic beverage, but spirit as in an invisible force. Here are three more words, just to round out our vocabulary. This one is spelled aleph mem, with a tzera under the aleph. This word is pronounced aim. Aim means mother. This word is spelled beit, nun, with a tzera under the beit. The beit has a dagesh, so it is pronounced ba. Tzera is a, and nun is na. Altogether, this is pronounced bain. Bain means sun. This is not the sun that is in the sky, but son, S-O-N, meaning a male child. Finally, we have this word, beit tav, with a kamatz under the beit. Again, this beit has a dagesh, so it is pronounced ba. Kametz is a, and tav is t. Altogether, this is pronounced bat. Bat means daughter. Let's do a quick review of all the words that we've learned in the last 7 lessons. On the right, we have kain, which means yes. Next to that, we have lo, which means no. Here we have a set of words for family members. At the top, working from right to left, we have av, which means father, em, which means mother, and ach, which means brother. In the bottom row, starting on the right, achot means sister, bain means son, and bat means daughter. Here are some words for body parts. Again, at the top right, we have rosh, which means head, followed by yad, which means hand. In the bottom row, peh means mouth, and ayin means eye. Here we have some words describing the outdoors. First we have eretz, which means land, then shamayim, which means sky. In the bottom row, mayim means water, and ruach means wind. The rest of the words don't fall into new word. It is spelled aleph, dalet, mem. This word is pronounced Adam. Adam means man. Adam is also a name, the name of the first man in the Bible, Adam. This word is spelled Beit Aleph, and it is pronounced Ba. ba means coming. With these two words, we can make our first sentence. Adam ba means Adam is coming. This sentence is pretty simple, but there are some important things about it that I need to explain. The first thing to explain is where the is in this sentence comes from. Adam means Adam, and ba means coming, but why do I translate this sentence, Adam is coming? Where is the Hebrew word for is? The answer is that there is no Hebrew word for is. Hebrew has a word for was and a word for will be, but no word for is. The idea of is just assumed in Hebrew. There is no need to have a separate word for it. The idea of the word is there, but the word itself is, in a sense, invisible. So, when we translate Hebrew sentences, since it is incorrect in English to say Adam coming, we must add in is to our translation wherever that is appropriate. A second thing to explain, which is relevant to our sentence, is what we call the parts of speech. We can think of words as having different jobs or different purposes, and we have names for each of those purposes. For example, the purpose of some words is to represent a person, a place, or a thing. Any word for a person, place, or thing is called a noun. In our sentence, Adam ba, the word Adam is a noun, because Adam is a person. Another part of speech is a verb. A verb is a word for an action. So in our sentence, the word ba is a verb, because coming is an action. So again, a noun is a word for a person, place, or thing, and a verb is a word for an action. So, words have meanings of their own, but to make good use of words, we have to combine them in a way that makes sense. A sentence is basically the smallest set of words we can use to make what we call a complete thought. It turns out that there are certain parts of speech that a sentence must have in order to make sense. So, we need at least one verb in every sentence. In our example sentence, Adam ba, it wouldn't work to just say Adam. That's not a complete thought by itself, because what are you telling me about Adam? But when you add the verb, you've completed the thought. Adam is coming. Now, of course, it also wouldn't work for a sentence to only have a verb. If our sentence was just ba, then that also isn't a complete thought, because it hasn't told us who or what is coming. So, in addition to a verb, every sentence also needs to have a subject. The subject of a sentence is a noun that is performing the action of the verb. So in our sentence, Adam ba, ba is the verb, and Adam is the subject, because Adam is the one who is coming. Every sentence needs to have, at the very least, a verb and a subject. It's worth pointing out that these rules for sentences that I've just described are true not only for Hebrew, but for all languages. So in any language, including English, a sentence must contain a subject and a verb. There is, however, one very important difference between English and Hebrew in the way their sentences are constructed. In English, the subject is always written before the verb. So I have to say, Adam is coming. I cannot say, coming is Adam. Since Adam is the subject, Adam must be written before the verb. However, in Hebrew, the subject does not have to come before the verb. The order of the words is actually flexible. So in our example sentence, we have written our subject first and our verb second. Adam ba. But we could just as easily write our verb first and our subject second. We could write ba Adam, and our sentence would still mean exactly the same thing. In Hebrew, the subject and verb can be written in any order. Let's review what we've learned today. First, we learned that there is no Hebrew word for is, so we have to put the is in the sentence ourselves when we translate from Hebrew to English. We learned about the parts of speech. A noun is a word for a person, place, or thing. A verb is a word for an action. We also learned some rules about sentences. Every sentence must have a verb in it, and every sentence must also have a subject that is acting out the verb. Also, we learned that in English, the order of words in a sentence is very important to the meaning of the sentence, but in Hebrew, the subject and verb can be complex sentences. First, here is a new word. It is spelled kaf, lamed, beit. Notice that the kaf has a dagesh, so it makes the k sound, while the beit does not have a dagesh, so it makes a v sound. This word is pronounced kelev. Kelev is a noun. It means dog. And as a side note, this word is where the name Caleb comes from. Here we have our next sentence. The first word is kelev, which we just learned means dog. The second word is ba, which we saw in the last lesson. Ba means coming. This sentence is translated, a dog is coming. Notice in our translation that we have added two words in English, the word is, which I explained in the last lesson, and we've also added the word a. Hebrew does not have a word for a. Just like the word is, the word a is implied in many Hebrew sentences. In a moment, I will explain when the word a is implied and when it isn't, but first we're going to introduce a new concept. A prefix is a short word, or even a single letter, that we can attach directly to the beginning of another word. The prefix has a meaning of its own, and that meaning will add to the meaning of the word that it is attached to. Here we can see some common examples of English prefixes. One very common prefix is sub, which means under. So when we add the prefix sub before a word like title, we get the full word subtitle, which means a phrase that is written underneath of a title. There are many more examples of the prefix sub. A submarine travels under the water. A sub-zero temperature is below zero. Subpar means below average. And there are many more examples. Another common prefix is im, which means not. So impossible means not possible. Improper means not proper. Immoral means not moral. And there are many more examples. So these prefixes are not words that can be written all by themselves. Sub and im are not words of themselves, but instead they are added to the front of another word, and then their meaning is added to the meaning of that word. And just like English has prefixes, Hebrew has prefixes also. We're going to learn a few of them today. Here is our first Hebrew prefix. It is a letter he, with a patach underneath the he. This prefix is pronounced ha. When this prefix is added to the front of a noun, it adds the meaning of the word the. Here is an example. This word is kelev, which we just learned. Kelev means a dog. However, if we add the he patach prefix to the front of kelev, it is then pronounced ha-kelev, and now it means the dog. This he prefix is sometimes referred to as the definite article because it makes a word definite or specific. So if I say kelev, I could be referring to any dog, but if I say ha-kelev, I am referring to one specific dog. This he prefix usually has a patach underneath it, but when it appears before a word that starts with aleph, ayin, or resh, then it will have a kametz underneath it instead of a patach. Here we can see an example of the different vowels that can go under the he prefix. On the left we see ha-kelev, which means the dog, and the vowel underneath the he prefix is a patach. On the right we see ha-av, which means the father, and since av starts with an aleph, the vowel under the he prefix is a kamatz instead of a patach. We can add this definite article to our sentences now. Before, we had the sentence kelev ba, which means a dog is coming. Here we have ha-kelev ba, which means the dog is coming. Here is another word. It is spelled Beit, Yod, Tav. This word is pronounced Bayit. Bayit means house. Here we have another prefix. Again, it is just a single letter, a beit, and it has a shva vowel underneath it. So this prefix is pronounced b. This prefix means in or with. Here is an example of this prefix in action. Bayit means house, and if we add a beit with a shva in front of this word, then we get bavayit, which means in a house. As a side note, you can see in the example on the left that the beit in bayit has lost its dagesh, but that doesn't affect the meaning of the word at all, only the pronunciation. Now we can put this prefix into a sentence. Our example here is Adam bevayit. Adam means Adam, and bevayit means in a house. So this sentence would mean Adam is in a house. Here is another example. This is Hakelev bevayit. Hakelev means the dog, and bevayit means in a house. So this sentence would mean the dog is in a house. Here is one more word. This is spelled Dalet, Vav, Dalet. This word is pronounced David. David means beloved, and it is also the name we know as David. There is one more prefix we have to learn in this lesson, and that is the Vav prefix. This prefix can take a number of different vowels underneath it. The most common vowel to use is the shva, but you can see a number of other vowels depending on the specific situation. No matter what vowel it has, the Vav prefix means and. As a side note, there are very few words that start with a Vav. So if you see a Vav at the beginning of a word, it is extremely likely that this Vav is serving as a prefix. So, with our new prefix and our new word in mind, let's read this new sentence. The first word is Adam, which is the name Adam. The second word is Vedavid. So this is the name David with the Vav prefix in front of it. So it would mean and David. The last word is bevayit. Again, this is the word bayit with the beit prefix in front of it. So that would mean in a house. Altogether, this sentence would read, Adam and David are in a house. One last thing to know before we wrap up is that sometimes when a prefix is added to a word, it will change the other vowels that are in the word. Here is an example. The word eretz, which means land, has a segol under the aleph and a segol under the resh. However, when we add the hey prefix to this word, notice that the segol under the aleph actually changes to a kametz. This can be confusing. You might see a word that you recognize and the letters all look right, but it has different vowels. There are specific rules about how and when these vowel changes happen, but we are not going to concern ourselves with those rules here. For our purposes, just know that the vowels in a word can and do sometimes change. So if you see a word that has the same letters as another word that you recognize, but different vowels, then it's probably the same word. Let's review what we've learned today. First, we learned that Hebrew has no word for a. We learned that we can add prefixes to the front of words, and those prefixes add extra meaning to those words. We learned 3 specific examples of prefixes. The object. So the subject is the noun that is doing the action of the verb. The object is a noun that is having the action done to it. Here is an example in English. Adam found David. In this sentence, the verb, the action, is found. The subject, the one doing the finding, is Adam. And the object, the one being found, is David. So again, the subject is doing the action, and the object is having the action done to it. Here is that same sentence in Hebrew. Adam, matzah, David. Adam is the subject. Matzah is a new word. It is a verb that means found. And David is the object. Now, remember what I said about the word order in Hebrew sentences? The verb and the subject can appear in any order. Also, the object can appear anywhere in the sentence. So this presents a problem. In this sentence, Adam, matzah, David, how do we know that Adam is the subject and David is the object? In other words, how do we know that this sentence is saying that Adam found David and not saying that David found Adam? Also consider this sentence, matzah, Adam, David. Remember, word order doesn't matter, so this sentence is just as good as the last sentence. How do we know who is the subject and who is the object in this sentence? The words are in a different order, but we have the same problem. In both of these sentences, we don't actually know who is finding who. Fortunately, there is a solution to this problem, and it comes in the form of this little word. This word is spelled Aleph, Tav, and it is pronounced 8. What is the definition of 8? 8 is a unique word in that it cannot be defined as any single word. Instead, 8 is sometimes called the direct object preposition. What this means is that in a sentence, 8 is the word that comes before the object in that sentence. The purpose of 8 is to tell you which word in a sentence is the object of the sentence. Going back to our example sentence, we can add the word 8, and now the sentence makes perfect sense. Adam, matzah, 8, David. Since the 8 comes right before David, we know that David is the object of the sentence. David is the one being found. So now we can say with confidence that this sentence means Adam found David. Here is the same sentence, but we've changed the position of the 8. This reads, 8, Adam, matzah, David. In this sentence, since the 8 comes before Adam, that means that Adam is the object of the sentence. Adam is the one being found. So the translation of this sentence would be, David found Adam. Even though the subject, verb, and object can be written in any order in a sentence, the 8 is always written right before the object. Again, that is the entire purpose of the word 8. 8 tells you which word in a sentence is the object. With that in mind, take a look at this sentence. Matzah, 8, Adam, David. What do you think this sentence means? You can pause the video here and hit play again when you're ready to hear the answer. Ready? The translation of this sentence is, David found Adam. Since the 8 appears directly before Adam, Adam is the object of the sentence. We're going to use 8 some more, but first, here is another word. This word is spelled Resh, Chet, Lamed. This word is pronounced Rachel, and Rachel means a ewe, which is a female sheep. It is also a name, the name we know in English as Rachel. With our new word, we can make a new sentence. This is Matzah, Adam, 8, David, va'et, Rachel. This is our longest sentence yet, so let's break it down one word at a time before we try to put it all together. The first word is matzah, which is the verb that means found. Our next word is Adam, which is the name Adam. Next, we have ate. So that means that the word after ate is the object of the sentence. Next is the object of the sentence, David, which is the name David. After David, we have va'et. This word starts with a vav, so we can assume that this is the vav prefix, which means and. The rest of the word is ate, so that would mean that the very next word is the object of the sentence. But wait, don't we already have an object for this sentence? Isn't David already the object of the sentence? It is, but we can, in fact, have more than one object in a sentence. When a sentence has more than one object, each object in the sentence needs to have the word ate in front of it. So then, what is the second object in this sentence? The word after the second ate is Rachel, which is the name Rachel. So, to recap, the verb in this sentence is matzah. There are two ates, one before David and one before Rachel, so those are the two objects of the sentence. The other word in the sentence is Adam, and that must be the subject. When we put it all together, we get Adam found David and Rachel. Again, the ates in this sentence let us know who is doing the finding and who is being found. There is one more thing about sentence structure that I want to show you, and that is the idea of a prepositional phrase. There are words and prefixes that are called prepositions. I'm not going to explain exactly what prepositions are right now. Instead, what you need to know is that the bait prefix, the one that means in or with, that prefix is also considered a preposition. So when the bait prefix is attached to a noun, then that combination of prefix and noun then becomes what we call a prepositional phrase. The reason that's important is because a prepositional phrase cannot be the subject of a sentence. Let's look at an example so you can see what I mean. Here is our example sentence. Bevayet, Adam, matzah, ate, David. Bevayet means in a house. Adam is Adam. Matzah is found. And ate David tells us that David is the object of our sentence. Notice, though, that we have two nouns that could be the subject of this sentence, Adam and bayet. However, because bayet has a preposition in front of it, it is bevayet, this makes it a prepositional phrase, and so bayet cannot be the subject of this sentence. The house cannot be the one doing the finding. Not only because that wouldn't make any sense, but because the bait prefix in front of it tells us that it cannot be the subject of this sentence. So this sentence would read, Adam found David in a house. For the remainder of this lesson, let's quickly review all of the grammar concepts we've learned over the past few lessons. We're going to need all of them for our next lesson. Here are our rules for sentences. Verbs are words for actions, subjects are nouns that are performing actions, and objects are nouns that are having actions done to them. Every sentence must have a verb and a subject. Verbs, subjects, and objects can be written in any order. The word ate is written before the object in a sentence, and its purpose is to show that the word after it is an object. Hebrew does not have several words that English has, but these words must be translated into English wherever they belong. The words is, am, and are do not exist as their own words in Hebrew, but their meaning is understood in some sentences. Also, the word a does not exist as a standalone word in Hebrew, but many times it must be added when a sentence is translated into English. Next, we have the prefixes. Prefixes are letters to English. Everything we've learned so far will be put to use right here. So let's get right into it. Here is our Hebrew Bible verse. Let's read the whole thing first, and then take it one word at a time. Bereshit, bara, Elohim, 8, ha-shamayim, the 8, haaretz. Let's start by taking a closer look at the first word. This is pronounced Bereshit. We haven't learned this word yet, but there are a couple of things you might notice right away. First, this word starts with a bait, and there is a shva underneath the bait. So you might guess that this bait at the beginning is actually the bait prefix, the one that means in or with. That is, in fact, exactly what that is. So this word starts with a bait prefix. The word that this bait prefix is attached to is reshit. You might notice that this word starts with resh, aleph, shin, which is how the word rosh is spelled. We learned the word rosh a number of lessons ago, and it means head. This word, reshit, is in fact related to the word rosh. Rosh means head or first, and reshit means beginning or best. So, with our bait prefix at the start of this word, we might translate this something like in beginning. But we'll take a look at the rest of the sentence before we decide exactly how to translate this word. Here is our second word. This is pronounced bara. We haven't learned this word yet either. Bara is a verb, and it means created. So here we've found the verb for our sentence. Now we just need to find the subject and the object. Here is our third word. This is pronounced Elohim. This is a word we've already learned. It means God. Our fourth word is 8. 8, you'll recall, doesn't have a translation. Instead, what it tells us is that the very next word is the object of our sentence. The verb for this sentence is bara, which means created. So whatever word comes after this word 8 is the thing or person that is being created in this sentence. Our fifth word is ha-shamayim. The first thing to notice is that this word starts with a hey, and there is a patach underneath the hey. And this is, in fact, the hey prefix, which means the. The word that the hey is attached to is shamayim. This is a word that we learned a few lessons back. Shamayim means sky, or heaven. So altogether, we can translate this word, the sky. Also, since this word comes after 8, this is the object of our sentence. So the sky is the thing in the sentence that is being created. Our sixth word is va'et. The vav at the beginning is the vav prefix, so it means and. The rest of this word is 8. So this is telling us that there are two objects in this sentence, because there are two 8s. Ha-shamayim was one object, and whatever word comes after this 8 is a second object. This is our seventh word, pronounced haaretz. Notice that this word starts with a hey, and there is a kamatz under the hey, and the very next letter is an aleph. If you remember our rule about the hey prefix, the hey will have a patach underneath it, unless the hey appears before an aleph, ayin, or resh. In this case, the hey appears before an aleph. So this hey at the beginning is the hey prefix, which means the. The rest of the word would be aretz, which looks a lot like another word we've learned. Eretz is a word that means land, and this word haaretz is actually the exact same word. Remember when I said that sometimes when you add a prefix to a word, the vowels inside that word will change? That's what's happening here. So even though the first vowel is different, this is still the exact same word. So now that we've looked at each individual word, let's put this sentence together. Bereshit means something like in beginning. Bara is our verb. It means created. Elohim means God. 8 tells us that the next word is the object of this sentence, and that next word is hashamayim, which means the sky. So if we connect that to our verb, we know that this is telling us that something created the sky. Our next word is va'et, so we now have 2 objects, and that second object is the next word, haaretz, which means the land. So we know from the words bara, 8 hashamayim, va'et haaretz, that this sentence is saying that something created the sky and the land. So, what is it that created the sky and the land? What is the subject of this sentence? We have 2 nouns to choose from, Bereshit and Elohim. However, one of these words is actually a prepositional phrase, so that word cannot be the subject of this sentence. Bereshit starts with the bait prefix, so it is a prepositional phrase, and so it cannot be the subject of this sentence. That leaves us only one choice to be the subject, and that is Elohim. So Elohim, God, is the subject, the thing that created the sky and the land. And Bereshit means in beginning. So this entire sentence would read, in beginning, God created the sky and the land. Now, this sentence is of course from the book of Genesis, which, by the way, in Hebrew is called Bereshit. This is Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Most translations of this verse read something like, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is a little different from what we translated. First of all, our translation said, in beginning, and usually you will see, in the beginning. This is because it's very awkward in English to not include the word the here. We could say, in a beginning, and that would technically be correct, but it still reads very awkwardly. So most translations will use the word the instead to make things flow better. Also, instead of the words sky and land, many translations will use heaven and earth. These 2 translations are basically equivalent because heaven means sky and earth means land. The reason I prefer to use the word land here is because in modern times we tend to think of the word earth in its astronomical context. We think of Earth as the 3rd planet from the sun, but what eretz really means is the ground underneath your feet. So even if you were to go to, say, another planet, whatever ground you walked on would still be called eretz. It would still be called land. So I personally like to use the word land in this translation because it's more consistent with the way the word eretz is normally used in the scriptures. Now that we've translated our very first verse, there are 2 comments that I want to make about this. First, I hope you're encouraged and that you see that you can pick up the Hebrew language for yourself and put it to use. In just 11 lessons, you've gone from knowing nothing at all about the language to translating a verse from the Bible. We've only begun to scratch the surface of the language, and I've omitted many, many details in order to get us this far, this fast, but I hope you see where you can end up by putting in some effort. My second comment is that I hope you see some of the difficulties one can encounter when translating a Bible verse. The very first word, Bereshit, is difficult to translate. It doesn't have a hey attached to it, so it shouldn't read in the beginning. But on the other hand, if this doesn't mean in the beginning, then what does it mean? If we translate it in a beginning, then is that implying that there was more than one beginning? Is that what this verse is trying to say? It's a tricky thing to figure out how to interpret this correctly. Also, back when the King James translation was made, people would use the word earth to refer to soil or ground. But today that term is more often used to refer to the planet. So is it better for us to stick with the traditional translation, or to use a word that reflects modern English better? These are all difficult choices that a translator has to make, and there isn't always a clear, correct answer. This is a big reason why there are different translations of the Bible, and this is why it's very important to know as much as you possibly can about the language you are translating from when you make a translation. Now that you've gotten this far in your Hebrew education, I hope you are encouraged and confident that you can continue to learn the language and put it to use. But I also hope that you are humble and that you understand that you are not a Hebrew expert and not yet ready to argue with scholars and translators. That concludes our lesson.